Ladies and gentlemen, live from the SDG Tent at Davos, it's my pleasure to kick off the Hoffmann Institute panel on transforming business education. We're living in an amazing moment where there's a real consensus emerging around the need to transform business as an institution. For those of you, if you think at WEF, there are sort of three big reports that come out beforehand. The WEF Global Risks Report, again, for the third year in a row, climate as the #1 risk. The Oxfam report for the fifth year, again, highlighting continued increases in income inequality. And then I think probably the most troubling one is the Elderman work on trust and the continued crisis and lack of faith. Although one thing I would highlight in there, if you look at how people think their employer will do the right thing, broadly speaking, you still have 2/3 of the people feeling like their employer will do the right thing, 3 times the level of government. But again, as we know, the challenge is there's this consensus emerging that business has to step up and be part of the solution. But what do we know? We know that that kind of excitement only takes you so far. Changing whole systems is a hard, slow process. Think about, e-commerce in 2000, lots of excitement and then a long winter. Think about what people are about to live through in blockchain, 2016, 2017, lots of excitement, but changing those systems is hard. We can expect the same thing about transforming business institutions. We've seen it before with all the excitement over CSR, and a lot of then the cynicism comes in, the pushback comes in, which is why we are interested in business education. Right? It takes time to change education, but if you really want to shift an institution like business, you've got to change some of those foundations. That's what we're here to explore today with Paul Polman, a decade as the CEO of Unilever, Sadia Khan, the president of the INSEAD Alumni Association, André Hoffmann, who wears many hats, but does chair the advisory council of our Hoffmann Institute, Ilian Mihov, Dean of INSEAD, and my dear colleague, Subi Rangan, Professor of Strategy. Paul, we're going to kick off with you. So you really incredibly out in front on this issue. So earlier than most, talking about the need to transform business. So eloquent and so such a role model for so many people. I guess if you could just kick us off, though, what do you think about the skills that we need to change? If we're really going to complete this revolution, how does management and leadership skills need to change?
So the first thing, if you take, is this working? No, yeah. It's not working. Hello? Thanks. So the first thing, if you really look at where we are in the state of the world, and I won't want to spend too much time on that, you got enough of that in Davos this week, but we're well off track in many things, the most important ones being climate and inequality. These things are created by people that clearly are operating in a way that doesn't give us the results we're after, and education has a big part of that. If you also look at the average tenure of the CEO of a Fortune 500 company being dropped down to less than 4 years now, you clearly see that we have a group of people or leaders that are not equipped to deal with today's challenges, increasingly so. And I could point out that some other statistics that would reinforce that even more. So we are not producing, or we have not produced, the people that we need to deal with the challenges that we have today. One of the things is at the end of the day, unfortunately, I think we just came from Jane Goodall on the session that we had on biodiversity, and my comment is actually the same now, so I don't, that's how you can be on many panels, you just say the same thing. But the disconnect that is now happening with this urbanization, for example, where you get 70% of the people living in cities, where 90% or 85% of the global economy is in cities, no surprise that people lose touch with what nature is and the force of nature as a source for humanity in the first place. So we need to bring some of that back. Technology is a good example as well, where we're finding out increasingly so that although we are more and more connected as people, supposedly we're actually lonelier than we've ever been, and in fact less connected at the human level. So the first thing in education What I always look for is not necessarily the technical skills and being able to be able to do in this world this or this, because frankly, 50% of the jobs we will have 20, 30 years from now don't exist today, and I'm not going to guess what they are in the first place. So we need to spend far more time on humanity. We need to bring humanity back to education. We need to create human beings again. The best way to be a leader is to first and foremost be a human being. So how can we create leaders that have this enormous sense of awareness what is going on in the world, but above all also an enormous level of engagement to do something about it? How do we create the people again that are more purpose-driven? Because we clearly seem to have a vacuum. People that understand that it is in their own interest to put themselves to the service of others, and then actually realize that they're better off themselves as well. How do we get people that work in partnerships, that can think longer term, that are systemic thinkers to some extent? You know, the triangles of water, food, or energy, they're complex things, they're not easy. So we need people that actually embrace that complexity and can distill it down to simplicity and drive it to action. But above all, I think people that are human beings would be the first thing. And that's why in education we have to look at many things probably totally differently. You know, I always think a little bit more on Madunas, how he totally scattered the paradigms of how banks should lend. Should never lend to a woman, he only lent to women. He should never lend small amounts, he only did small amounts, and the story goes on. You know, we need to do the same thing in education again. I think the best thing, which I also see in Unilever, from the people that we take in, is we need to take in real people. And real people means also that we have to make our education system less elitist. That we also need to bring in the humanities again. You know, ecology, all the other studies, and we've produced too many silos. In fact, if you want to keep it simple, and then I'll shut up, the educational system is not different from the way we've defined GDP. And unless we define GDP to also include environmental and social capital, we will not solve the world's problems. The educational system we've created, and certainly the MBA system, of which I'm a product as well, is narrowly defined as financial capital. And the structures we've created around that, very difficult to change in academics, are actually reinforcing that. So you literally will have to break the educational system. What I like was what André has done, besides being an enormous human being and a great friend that I would always support, is to put the institute, the Hoffmann Institute at INSEAD, and we had our first board meeting, and I like his aspiration of creating these leaders by redefining the education and spending as much time on someone's inner core as we spend on, like usually education does, the outer core.
All right, thank you, Paul. As usual, very great articulation, the need for managers, more humanity, more ability to deal with uncertainty and systems, and again, the need to fundamentally change the metrics and the measures. Now, Subi, within INSEAD, you're really the first colleague I remember years ago now talking about the need to change business education and business, moving from just performance and financial performance to also embracing purpose and social progress. How do you see the role of business schools going forward in this kind of change?
Thanks. This one works. Peter, I think, Paul said many things that I would want to echo. And you pointed out that we have many, many challenges, among them temperature, among them trust, among them the tensions that we see in the streets of France, where I live, with the Gilets jaunes. And basically, we've produced an economy that is focused on output, but neglected outcomes. Now, we have one main solution, which is the powerful are not using their power for everybody, so let's regulate power, whether it's GDPR, or whether it is through the tax system, or through penalties, etc. Let's regulate power. There is one other, I think, more promising solution, which is let's educate power. And business schools, including INSEAD, we really do groom, at least select those who are energetic, smart, ambitious, and therefore going to be eventually powerful. And so the question becomes, what do we need to change? Today, it's very clear that we are promising people a great career and will help them do that. Let's also enable our students, whether executives or MBAs, to also focus not only on career, but also on their contribution. To focus not only on what kind of competences they will get, whether it's in finance or in marketing or now in digital, but let's also deepen their character. Paul talked about the outer core. When we look at a LinkedIn or we look at a CV, people list their competence, not their character. I'd say to managers here, please recruit for character, develop for competence. Usually we're doing the opposite, and it's a little more difficult than that. Finally, my sense is that a lot of teaching happens in schools. Learning happens at work. If the CEOs here are not willing to be role models, young newcomers cannot learn what character is, what complexity is, how to embrace contradictions, how to do performance and progress, how not just to focus on compensation, but to also focus on caring about the climate, caring about society, caring about the supply chain or future generations. So this is my sense, Peter, is that we at INSEAD, with this gift and with the way our school has been guided by the alumni, I feel so fortunate. Like you, I've been at INSEAD nearly 24 years now. And I feel so fortunate that our school allows amazing experiments and has been, if you will, playfully trying to move forward, trying to learn. We have a lot of work to do, but I think we're in a good space. And if we can move not only kind of with social science research, but also with philosophy research, if you want not only markets, but morals, business models and business morals, I think we are getting started. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Subi. Actually, I was just thinking about what you were saying about character and competence. Admission decisions at INSEAD are typically made by alumni plus faculty. Do you think we should be admitting more on character than relative to competence as a school?
I think definitely, because there's so much learning that is social. So having in the class a diverse cohort, people who really come in caring and they don't have to learn, they may be helped by those who have competence in startups and so on. So absolutely, I think this is very important.
Why don't we pick up on what Paul was saying about André? So, incredible passion for trying to address these issues. One foot in the business world with, Hoffmann, LaRoche, others within the NGO community, World Wildlife Fund and such. What led you to sort of decide to engage around this issue of business education, and why with INSEAD?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I'm also a product of the MBA culture, as Paul was just saying. And when I did my MBA, I was told quite clearly that my job, if I were to get employed by somebody, was to increase the share price, was to ensure that the company increased shareholder value, and that a proper company should be run for shareholders. In other words, you should make money. Now, I have news for you. That's not what's happening in the real world. Some businesses are still run on profit only, but in general, we don't live that sort of life. When you go home from office, when you talk to your friends, when you get into a meeting like Davos, you're not making money. You're becoming a better human being. You're trying to understand what it actually means to be human. And now, that's the origin of the reflection. We need to change something in the way we teach MBA. Now, why MBA, which is a rather elitist type of degree? Because I hope that some of us, because I see a lot of faces I know here, are responsible for some major decision, and therefore it is quite important that we should be trained in the proper way. The likelihood of an INSEAD MBA to find a way into a place where decision matters, where asset allocation are taken on a big scale, is higher than in other universities, in other schools. It is the leading business school in the world. It's easy for me to say that because A, I graduated from it, and B, I was on the board for 2 terms, which I enjoyed a lot. However, when I arrived at INSEAD at the beginning and I started saying, you know, we need to think about sustainability, I was told very clearly, the business of business is business. You are there, no, very clear. And you know, fine. Dialogue started, the conversation started, and as the world was changing, people realized that it was probably a good idea to look at this issue and to try to look into this in a better manner. And since we need to give the tools to future managers how to be able to manage the companies they're going to be responsible for, we need to create a toolbox. We need to create a box of, full of the instruments that are going to be helpful for doing this management. And I'm convinced that it also has a lot to do with internationality. You know, how many different ways of thinking can we bring into the model? If you go to a US business school, you will have a lot of Americans and maybe some Americans born abroad and maybe some people who want to become American and who go there for the green card. And you don't really get the whole gamut of world civilization that you get at INSEAD. It's not overdoing it. There are about 90 nationalities per, correct me if I'm wrong, 94 nationalities per promotion. That's something that is needed. We need people to be more sensitive to what's happening around the place and to have more of a balance on this. So why now? Because I can see it's not working, so it's not working. Why at INSEAD? Because I have faith in what INSEAD can deliver in that context. And I hope that we will be able, with the work of the Institute over the years, to document this and to give people the opportunities to really enter into the business world with a different manner. We don't want to manage businesses for shareholders, we want to manage it for stakeholders. We're not doing it for money, we're doing it for impact and for impact on the community that our businesses are trying to serve. I'll stop there. If somebody wants to clap, you're welcome.
Thank you, André. All right, let's turn to Ilian, who is charged with delivering on this vision and this expectation. But Ilian has stepped forward and actually is personally serving as the first academic director of the Institute. So Ilian, I'll give you the big V question. What's your vision for what we can do with this Institute and with the school in general on these issues?
Well, I'm not on many panels, but I still say the same thing all the time. So it's, I think it's unique time for business education. And today I was sitting in another session reflecting how important is what we're doing. And the main reason I think is unique time is because we talk about the need for business to change, for business leaders to change. There are many different sessions discussing this, but fundamentally we're facing a long-term problem where is sustainability, inequality, or all these social tensions, and we do need a long-term solution. If we try to change every CEO today, it is a bit like this Sisyphus work where you are pushing the rock and then it goes down again. Because then the next CEO comes and then you try to change them. So if we want for us to be more sustainable, if we want actually to change the world, we need to change education. And I think that we are very fortunate to be in a school that we can do this, very flexible. We want to start changing mindsets. So it's very different from what we have been doing in the past. We have been teaching a lot of great things. We continue teaching. We have great professors at INSEAD. But with this institute, we want to change the way that people think about the world. So when you create value for your company, which you have to do because otherwise you run out of business, you have to think what is the impact you create on society. And I think that very often we forget these things. Our hope, and that's the vision, is that our students, when they go out, when they start making decisions, when they become alumni, they'll be much more sensitive to the impact that they're creating. And they might put it even central in their organizations. And I think that education is absolutely key, and this mindset change is key to the solution, because the world, I know it's a cliche, it's very complex, everything is a lot of uncertainty. So we don't know what the solutions are. We don't know yet what the solutions are today or what the solutions will be to the problems 10, 15 years from now. So we have to train these people to be able to figure out the problem and figure out the solution. So I think that it's exciting because I don't know why it's the most important thing, but it is certainly a central thing without which it will be very difficult to move forward.
Thank you, Ilian. Sadia, so, you know, education institutions are not known to change easily or fast. Both faculty and alumni are often quite conservative. So I'm curious, what do you think about how do you see the INSEAD alumni community responding to this message to step up on this issue, to make it central to what the school and the whole community is about?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. Is this working? Hello. Yeah. Right. So first of all, Subi mentioned that we've been focusing too much on the output and not enough on the outcomes. Without an ounce of modesty, I can say that INSEAD has actually perfected both output in terms of its graduates and outcomes in terms of the impact that the alumni have had so far. So I like the fact that everybody's talking about the future. I would argue that we've already done quite a bit over the past 60 years. Now, by way of introduction, the INSEAD Alumni Association is a volunteer-led body representing the interests of over 57,000 alumni across 175 countries. It is driven by passion to give back to the community. And when that community is presented with a mission larger than the self-interest, like the one enunciated by a dean, it knows no bounds in terms of the time, the energy, and the resources that get devoted. Last year alone, our alumni contributed over 50 million euros to advancing this cause. 3,000 volunteers gave their time and energy across the world to also promote the same cause. Now, this commonality of objective is very important for a community as diverse as ours to say with one voice, not only are we a force of good, we're a force to be reckoned with. Now, in terms of the skills that they've been demanding, as you know, Peter, we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years trying to roll out a lifelong learning initiative for our alumni. We had a survey last year where 75% of the respondents said that lifelong learning was the key membership benefit that they were looking forward to by the alumni community. Within that, sustainability featured high in the topics they wanted to discuss and talk about. When we talk about sustainability, we can't ignore 50% of the world's population. Again, when the school rolled out the gender initiative last year, again, there was a lot of traction with the alumni community. The survey suggested that over 70% of our alumni are contributing in a volunteer capacity to many pro bono works. Over 50% are directly involved in promoting economic growth in the developing world. So I would argue that if you extrapolate these numbers to the larger community, our alumni are involved not just in giving back by creating the employment and income opportunities to get people off the poverty line, above the poverty line. They're also creating social enterprises that deal directly with health and education issues. And others are volunteering their time and resources to building up the grassroots levels. So when we talk about mission of business as a force for good, it's not just a mission statement for alumni, it's a way of life.
Okay, thank you, Sadia. So again, Paul, I'm going to come back to you. So you can see, certainly as a community, we actually feel that these current business challenges play to some of our strengths. But as you know, having led big organizations, there's always a danger that we talk to ourselves. So we're really privileged to have you on the advisory group. How would you push INSEAD to actually deliver on what we aspire to? And also, particularly, how do we keep that outward focus and engage with the broader business community so we can really be part of the solution?
Yeah, well, at André's invitation, when you opened the Institute, I had the opportunity to give a little talk to the alumni. And I was mighty proud to call my mother to tell her that I'd been to INSEAD. So I do it in a different way now than what you all did. So I have a lot of admiration for your abilities to get into these schools. I never succeeded. I had different priorities at that time in my life. I still do. But seriously, I was thinking when you were talking, I wrote down because I like to make different things and keep myself busy when others are talking. But the MBA should really be a master's, if you want to, for better empathy. That's what your MBA should be. So that's what we really want it to be. But if we can get there, what you're doing with your Better Institute, you have your institute, which I think is good for business and society, which actually brings that to life a little bit. In terms of the things I wrote down, what you want is, at the end of the day, and that's why I come back to the word empathy, do you really care? Many of the schools or the academic environment, I think, are distancing themselves from responsibility by intellectual supremacy, which to me is bizarre. So often I say, why don't you, if you believe that climate science points that we are burning the planet, why don't you become a big advocate? I'm an academic, I'm neutral. Well, you know, what is bizarre that academics are not citizens of this planet and don't have children and all the other things, you know? So abdicating responsibility is finished, in my opinion. And we need to get the academic or the university environment to assume responsibility. You know, if you produce chemists that have all the ingredients that don't make any sense to keep this planet in balance, you're guilty. You should enforce that you study green chemistry, that everybody does that if we want to solve the problem. So any example you take, the universities would need to take far more responsibility, and responsibility not only for producing the leaders of tomorrow, because the leaders of tomorrow don't exist. They need to be continuously re-leaderized to be the leaders of the day after tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So you have to become an institution that walks the journey, that takes responsibility for the impacts that you'll have, and that produce people that are continuously refreshed to be able to do that. I'm not sure if I'm clear, but that is what it is. So it's a contract, I think, that goes beyond a 1 year or 2 year degree. It's a contract that has humanity and empathy in the middle. It's a contract that has a long-term commitment to solving these problems in the middle, of which you take equal responsibility. And it's a contract that is focused ultimately on the results that we need. So it's a different type of education, if you want to. And I think very few universities right now would really fit that description in my thinking. Oh.
Thank you very much. Ilian and Subi, I may come back to you later to hear your thoughts on combining scholarship with empathy. But first, I actually want to go to André one more time. So again, you're, as I said, a lot of connections into the nonprofit world where there's a lot of people who are drawn in strong on empathy. Do you see opportunities for business schools, business communities to bridge better into the nonprofit and also some parts of the public sector?
Thank you. First, I would like to sort of comment on something that I have forgotten earlier on. One of the reasons why I think that INSEAD is an agent of change in this region is this wonderful alumni body. The 57,000 people who are willing to not only listen to Sadia from time to time, but also to come back to school, to take classes, and now more and more electronically. We can do that. We can do that through electronic means. And so it's important that the vision of INSEAD as a business school, as a school for the world, is refreshed, as you just very rightly said. I mean, thought processes are changing, and thought processes should include all these things. So that's one of the main reasons. I forgot to say that before. Sorry. Now, why am I coming to this? How am I coming to education? I'm coming from the environmental community. I started my life associated with WWF, and I spent a lot of time, more than 20 years, in the organization, different levels. Much more than that, in fact, anyway. And for me, it's important to realize that this is a holistic approach. If you want to do something for poachers in Africa, for instance, or anything that we call poaching crime, it's not enough to just stop people to kill the elephant. You have to look at the whole chain. You have to go all the way from the country in where this thing is being produced. And so the issue is a holistic approach, and it has to do with governance. Good governance applies itself to systems through the power of businesses. We're in a period of history where businesses have more power than nations, and I'm afraid to say that that's not going to change very soon when we see the mess in which politicians have taken us. So we need to be able to bring new models, and the company governance is some good way of doing that. So how could we move the object quicker by making bridges with the non-profit sector, who for many years has been trying to fight this battle alone. And I'm afraid to say that it hasn't done that very successfully either. So if we really want to get to something which is a cohesive approach, if we want to make sure that the problems that are in front of us are solved in turns and in a sustainable way, we're going to have to create a unity. We're going to have to do it together. And I think that's a good reason for the center to open up to others' way of thinking.
Thank you, André. Maybe coming back to Subi, just for you personally, as a faculty member who cares about where things are going, what does this mean for you? What do you need to, what are you stepping up in your teaching, in your research? How has this lived for you?
Peter, as you know, for us, preaching is relatively easy. Teaching, especially if you want to be a top-class business school respected by your peers, it's very important that the research precedes the teaching. Without the rigor, relevance will not be sufficient. And this research is not just at the level of individual practices or cases, it's at the paradigm level. And the journey has just begun. So for me, I've been working on this for about 10 years. About 5 years ago, we created a Society for Progress. And the main addition there was the induction of 10 wonderful, amazing, world-class philosophers. And what we're trying to learn from them is the logic of reasoning. In business schools, we learn the logic of payoffs, efficiency, interests, but not moral reasoning. And I think without moral reasoning, we will have to look to somebody else, either the board or regulators. We would like to have, as Paul said, MBA meaning Masters of Better Alternatives. And better alternatives come from moral reasoning. Caring has to come into business decisions on the business model, on whether you will store my data, whether you will monetize it. All of these things are really at the micro level. We can't just have a few good leaders. We need a whole cadre of newly educated business doers, thinkers, etc. So to me, the research is very important. And basically, in the last 100 years, we've done research on two main fields. One, innovation, and the second, internationalization. The research that we need to deepen going forward is the third chapter of business, which is integration. How do we better integrate market and society, present and future, humanity and nature? It's not easy, and there are trade-offs. We've just begun. We don't even have a good model for NFV, net future value. NPV is what we all learned, where discount rates are positive. Today, for the first time, maybe we tolerate zero discounting. What about negative discounting, where the future is worth more than the present? We haven't theorized these things. We need to do that work. Again, I'm extremely grateful for the support, the encouragement, and the tolerance. When we first started this work, the board at INSEAD said, so Subi, when is this going to be ready for the classroom? And when I said it takes a generation to get ideas through the peer review process, I thought I was going to be fired that day from INSEAD saying, INSEAD moves much faster. Fortunately, Ilian has still kept me around, and so thank you for that, Ilian.
Very good. Thank you, Subi. What I want to do is, why don't we grab a few questions from the audience? I'd rather have sort of short, to-the-point questions, general, and just to see what's resonating, what you'd like to hear more about. A few hands going up. Anyone?
I'm actually inspired by Paul's wife wrote a book, edited a book about imaginal cells, which is like a different paradigm than the integration. The idea is there's a era of gorging, and then a caterpillar, if you're not familiar with it, kind of forms a chrysalis, and then the body turns into mush. And then these imaginal cells, which are originally attacked, then survive, thrive, and then come together to form the butterfly, which is a very different paradigm. And I'm curious.
What's the question?
Yeah, so it sounds counter a little bit to the whole, we have to kind of develop things and take a while, which is looking at transformation. Is it a rapid thing or is it a dramatic thing?
That's it. So yeah, what's the metaphor? What's the way we should think about this transformation? Very good. I'll take a couple other questions and let the panel react to those. You wanna... Yeah, in the back here.
Should we not also include much more different measures? I mean, Paul said GDP is not representing anymore today's world and today's wealth development. I think we need other measures, and companies have to be measured on other measures.
You know, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. What does that mean? How are we going to step up to that challenge? That's a big one. One more, maybe. Anyone got a different? Yeah, please. Right in the middle.
Okay, I'm a bit nervous. So, just one comment and then the very short question. The comment is on net future value, and you said we should stress the future. But actually, what is more precious than the present moment? Actually, where would we place something into the future? We take ourselves out of our responsibility to act now, right? And the question, it's based on a concept that I think we might need as a measure. It's the learnings on time invested. So when I spend 1 hour here in this room, what do I take away from this? For now, I just hear a lot of normative things. We should do this and this. So I wanted to ask each of you maybe, how do you actually role model leadership? How do you actually bridge this bridge between the future and the current or the young leaders? In which way do you help them grow?
All right, thank you very much for the question. So the menu is, again, how can we think about this complex transformation? Any insights that can guide us through this complexity? The critical issue probably around metrics, and then also as individual leaders, how can you live and embody the change that we're talking about? Sadia, I think it was your turn to speak, so I'm going to cold call on you, just like back at INSEAD.
Absolutely.
What reactions to one or two of those questions?
Well, I'll take the last one, which is what can we do better to guide the next generation? I think mentoring is a very important thing that we all need to be involved in at every stage in our lives. As the Alumni Association, we're in the process of rolling out a comprehensive mentoring system to make sure that whatever lessons we've learned, we're able to transfer that knowledge to the younger generation and guide them through the processes, not just in terms of business decisions, but in terms of how do we make more human decisions, how do you bring that personal element into the business matrix of decision making. I'll let Paul.
Very good. Andre or Paul, you want to jump on one of those?
I think this.
No.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you put it? Hello. Yeah. So I think this business of being able to measure success or to quantify outcome is sensationally important. And we need to invent a whole set of metrics which will allow us to do that more properly. At the moment, it's simple. We just need to look at the share price. You know, we need to look at the amount of money that we generate. And I understand why businesses are run that way, because it's simple. It's a snapshot. You can see what the company does. But we need to find new ways of measuring social and environmental returns as well. And we need to measure outcome in a different manner. And I think that's one of the jobs that the Institute should sort of look at very carefully. There are a couple of groups doing that. I mean, the Natural Capital Project, in terms of natural capital, there are a couple of new ways of looking at ways companies are being quoted on the stock exchange. But the point is that as long as investors cannot measure performance in an easy, comparable way, it's going to be difficult to install these things. So we're going to have to introduce a couple of normative things, as you say. It will have to be something that comes from inside, but we will have to be to generate it. I mean, there's no alternative to that.
Fully agree. Paul, if I was going to put you on either role modeling leadership or this transformation, can we all crawl into a cocoon and come out as butterflies?
Well, so first of all, if you, and I love her dearly, if you marry a wife that writes a book, you better have a job to support it. So, since I don't have a job now anymore, please buy our book. It's called Imaginal Cells. There it is. I still think there are 5,000 copies in my office, so if you actually buy it, I can go back into my office, which I now have to use again. So there are a lot of benefits. If you really like me, please help me. But I don't think it's different from what we've been talking about, and your question is a very pertinent one. The world, at the end of the day, when changes happen and these tough challenges are being attacked, is because individuals take that initiative. I've come to believe that for 99.9% of the things that need to be solved in this world, we need human willpower. We know how to build houses, and we still have homeless people. We know how to protect the forest. We still cut it down. We know how to feed the people, because we certainly can waste 30–40%. Of all the basic solutions to humanity, the Sustainable Development Goals well captured, it's all here. We don't need to go to Mars or Pluto or have another PhD. So it boils down to having the human willpower. And her book is really about a very simple thing that you find in every religion, from Hinduism to Islam, from Buddhism to Judaism, or from Christianity. It's basically the golden rule: do unto others and the planet as you would have liked to have done unto yourselves. If we as leaders in this world, who are in a position to take decisions and do something about it, would simply live by that rule, the world would be a better place already. And that's basically what she is trying to convey, and getting that into education at this point in time. In terms of measurements, you get what you measure, or you treasure what you measure, is very much the case. And I'm very heartened by the thousands of flowers blooming of people trying to say we're very good at maximizing our return on financial capital, and certainly benefits a few people, as Oxfam's report well showed again this year. But we're very poor of giving of measuring return, as André said, of social and environmental capital. So one of the things I certainly have appetite for is that if we can bring all these standard-setting bodies together that are trying to move it forward, like we've seen, for example, some progress on the price of carbon, but really going much further than that, we could really change the system. I think the biggest impediment towards the behaviors that we have is not what we've actually talked at this panel. I believe personally in the goodness of human beings. If I wouldn't want to be around on this wonderful planet. I know there are some that might violate that, but I'm not going to live my life around the people that are violating this. But you broadly have to believe in the goodness of human beings. Then the question becomes a very simple question. Then if that is the case, and we all want less people to go to bed hungry, inclusion, equal rights, attack air pollution, whatever it is, why aren't we collectively able to solve that? And the answer is, in my opinion, not that complicated. It is because we operate under the boundaries that are given to us, and individually feel not capable of moving these boundaries. And as these boundaries don't give us the results, our cycles have become so short that we start to deal with the underlying causes, very much a disease in politics right now, but also in business, what we call short-termism, and never really get the time to focus on these underlying causes. So we deal with the symptoms, often making it worse than actually attacking the underlying causes. The underlying causes are not that difficult, to be honest. We need to decarbonize the global economy. We're carbon junkies, but we need to decarbonize the global economy. We need to move to a circular economy, which is basically running out of resources. We need to move the financial markets to the longer term. And we need to find a system of growth that is inclusive. Not just all geared towards the few in the capital market, but actually reward labor, getting into just transition, new social context. Those are the four transition points. What makes it difficult is that we have a hard time waking up that it's not anymore a reliance on the government we can have, because that's broken and it will not change in the next 10 years, and that we need to step up and take that position and de-risk that political process. And what I always say to what we need for the leadership of tomorrow is leaders that put the interest of others ahead of their own, operating as a high level of integrity, obviously, to be able to have that right. But if we can create more of those leaders that think intergenerational, purposeful, interest of others ahead, I think we can solve the challenges that we have. Collectively, there are enough of these leaders, and her book, coming back to that full circle, points out to quite a lot of them, but it still boils down to individual leaders. It actually in life only boils down to one question as far as I'm concerned, which is very simple: do we care?
All right, thank you, Paul. We're gonna start wrapping up. Ilian, maybe you could just bring this back to business education. Share a few things that we're doing to step up to this challenge.
I think that actually what I will say is very consistent with what Paul was saying in terms of we believe that people are fundamentally good. So there are several reasons, I guess, that we ended up in this situation. Very often, we are acting upon what we are taught. And if you're taught that greed is good, then you act as greed is good. If you're taught that there is empathy and it is important, then you act with empathy. So I don't think that we should be normative, but I think that what is happening, I should tell you what is happening at INSEAD. So you can go on the website of the Institute and you can see, for example, our students in their strategy class working, 500 students working on one case, competing with each other to solve a case how to scale up an NGO in South Africa, Unjani, that provides healthcare to 15 million people who have no access to healthcare. Or they try to provide healthcare to 15 million people, but they have only 50 clinics run by nurses. So our students worked on this. Now they in operations class, they're working on that, the same case in marketing, and now in business as a force for good practicum. They actually will fly 20 students to South Africa in order to help this organization scale up or solve some of the problems. And I'm saying all this because we can teach a lot of things, we can have great discussions in the classroom, but it becomes very different when you actually start acting on this. I believe that in many cases we have a low-hanging fruit that can be taken simply by raising awareness. If we tell our students, people will value you not only for how much value you have created for the company, but what you have created for society, they will start acting on this because they will realize that this is something that people look at. If we tell them that there are all these people out there that need healthcare and their knowledge in strategy and operations can be helpful, they will do this. I do believe that fundamentally people are good, so if we bring this in the classroom, which we have been doing in the last year or two, then things will be changing much faster and in a much more sustainable way than just trying to change the current leaders out there.
All right, thank you, Ilian. Subi, you want to help me do my job and give some last thoughts to the group as we wrap up?
So I heard an alumnus say the definition of a millionaire should be changed. And this person from Nigeria said, I wish the definition of a millionaire is not someone who has $1 million, but someone who's touched 1 million lives. Now we can have the proper rankings of the list of people that we should respect. And I think, Peter, there are lots of good news in terms of metrics, the well-being index beyond GDP, et cetera, et cetera. I think in terms of the question you asked about what we can do, what I find in my own life is, my parents are still alive, my kids still need me, time is short, we're trying to do so much, but if you care, you're going to have a complicated life. Get used to it. Caring means sacrifice. Caring means giving time pro bono. At least 20 to 30% of my time is done pro bono, whether it's at the forum, whether it is with young people, sometimes alumni, but sometimes others, in India, in Brazil, etc. So just choose something. And somebody said the 2 most important days in your life. One day is maybe the day you're born. Most people celebrate their birthday. But the even more important day in our life, apparently, is the day we understand why we're born. Please ask that question, and I think you'll find great joy, great meaning, and you will be able to contribute. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Subi. All right. All right. So I'll just offer one last thought, trying linking this to Davos. A lot of discussion about the 4th Industrial Revolution. Where did business schools come from as an institution? The original industrial revolution, right? 110 years ago, 1900, business schools were created to do what? To create the brains for modern enterprise, to run the new, big, efficient businesses. So it was a brain game. What we're talking about now as we think about navigating a much more complicated, challenging world is how do we also change this institution to also be a heart game and combine the caring and the thinking. And for me, if we can pull that off, that's how we can have an incredible impact as a school in our community, but also setting the standard for business education across the world. Thank you for your attention. Have a wonderful Davos.